Thank you for welcoming me this evening. My name is Katie Higgins. I am an Advanced Clinical Practitioner, but I've also got a background in health visiting, and I'm a nurse as well, qualified nurse by background. I am a lecturer at the moment at a university in Manchester, but I still work very clinically out in primary care, in community, and out of hours as well. So this evening, I'm here to share my experience and speak to you about children's safeguarding and multi-agency working. Now, the session plan for this evening's session is just an overview of child maltreatment and impact for professional practice, multi-agency working, recognition and response. I'm going to speak to you about levels of need and what that might mean for children in your care. Explore risks and procedures around the looked after child and what to do if you have concerns or you need further support. Now, I do realise that children's safeguarding is quite an emotional topic, so please look after yourselves tonight after this session, because it may be that it brings back kind of memories of cases of children that you've looked after, or, you know, if you've had concerns and needed to escalate it, it can be quite an emotional response. So please look after yourselves this evening after this webinar. So I'm going to start off just by going through the categories of child abuse. And now there are four main areas of abuse. They are physical, neglect, emotional, and sexual. However, in children's safeguarding, generally what we find is that you won't generally find one category on its own. There's always a level of emotional abuse involved with all four of those areas. And, you know, you shouldn't kind of see those categories on their own. You know, there is often an overlap. So, for example, neglect, for example, you would expect an emotional aspect on that as well, rather than neglect alone. Now, examples that can be considered are as abuse, but are not limited to. So I'm just going to run through the examples. But again, this list isn't exhaustive. There is other examples of child abuse. So physical abuse, which includes hitting, punching, biting and kicking. Sexual abuse, which can include sexual exploitation, gang sexual violence. Psychological harm, so things like bullying, belittling, name calling, all come under the category of emotional abuse. Neglectful behaviour. Now, this is quite a big umbrella term, really. So this includes things like acts of omission, so restricting food and shelter, you know, making sure that, you know, a child's got a safe environment at home. I always remember a case when I was out working on the district, and I went into a neighbourhood and saw an 18-month-old out on the street in a baby grow with no shoes, being looked after by their brother and sister, which were likely 9 or 10. That would have come under the umbrella of neglect. And of course, I made that referral to social care. So we just need to be mindful with neglect. It's not the typical kind of thing that you would think of, you know, a child coming to school who's in a uniform too small or too big, who's smelly. You know, it's things like, you know, who's looking after that child? Is that child being left with children who are not suitable to look after that child? Has that child got a safe environment? Things like medical care as well are also important to kind of think about. So, for example, if you've got a child who's asthmatic, but are not being taken for their regular asthma reviews, or don't have their regular medication to hand, that would come under that umbrella term of neglect. So when you are looking after children, or you've got children in your care, you know, certain things like, you know, when did they last see a GP for their chronic condition? Have they got access to their regular medications? Or absolutely should be kind of forefront in your mind when you're assessing and looking after these children. It can be things like restriction to education, or anything that enables a child or a young person not able to kind of reach their full potential. So we just need to be mindful with that neglect. It is an umbrella term, and there are lots of things that come under that category of abuse when we're talking about neglect. Domestic abuse, so if a child lives in a household where there's domestic abuse, domestic violence, those children are categorised under the emotional abuse category, and social services will intervene to remove that child if that domestic abuse or domestic violence situation carries on. Exploitation of children and young people, including things like modern slavery, grooming, and this is particularly more prevalent as over the last kind of decade, really, particularly how children now have access to mobile phones. They do a lot of online gaming. So going back, maybe 30 years ago, that really wasn't kind of an issue as such, like it is now. We are seeing increasing numbers of children, particularly with online gaming, with the new apps that we have. So things like Snapchat, TikTok, all those kind of online games or social media. We're seeing a rise in children being groomed. So again, it's just to be mindful of ways that predators can actually access children. FGM, so female genital mutilation. So this is a police matter as well as a social care matter. So if you are looking after a child who you feel might be at risk of FGM, or you have suspicions that they might have had FGM, then that is something that needs to be reported to the police and social care. Honour-based violence and forced marriage, cyber abuse and radicalisation. So those are just some examples of what can be considered as abuse. But again, that list isn't exhausted, and there are many more that can be added onto that as well. Now, when we're talking about children, babies under 1 generally are at higher risk of abuse. So most children under the age of 1 are an age group that are most at risk of being killed in the hands of another. And about 45% of serious case reviews in England relate to babies under the age of 1. In England and Wales, babies are 8 times more likely to be killed than older children. So we do need to just be mindful when we're looking after babies. They are at higher risk of abuse. Some people might say, well, why are babies more at risk of abuse than older children? And, it can be for various reasons, one being that they're non-verbal, so they're not able to tell anybody about the abuse. They're quite small in size, so it's quite easy to cause harm to a small infant compared to a 10-year-old, for example. Babies need constant care, and if any of you in the audience are parents or have looked after a young child, it is quite demanding and can be quite overwhelming, particularly if you've got a child who cries for long periods. I know myself, when my children cried for, a short period of time, maybe only a few minutes, I found that highly stressful. And, children that have colic can cry for hours and hours on end. So again, it is a stressful environment. There are services like health visiting and midwifery, which try and educate young parents about the risk of shaking and what to do if you feel like you're going to lose control. But unfortunately, we still have children in England who experience shaken baby syndrome or other risks of harm. So other risk factors of child abuse is in the literature years ago, they identified these kind of 3 themes and they named them the toxic trio. More recently, it's been renamed as the trio of vulnerabilities. So domestic violence, parental mental health, and substance misuse are 3 factors or 3 issues which coexist where families have had, where there's been kind of significant injuries or child abuse cases in households which have these 3 things. So practitioners are told to be mindful that if you do have a household where there is domestic abuse, mental health concerns and substance misuse, just to be more aware of these families, make sure that they're getting tailored support, just because in those serious case reviews where there have been incidents with children, this has been found to be a factor where these have been lurking in the background and might cause a child to be at higher risk of harm. More recently, though, there has been kind of negative feedback about this concept of the toxic trio. And what they found is that some practitioners have misunderstood the concept of the toxic trio. So some practitioners have found that if none of them are present, a child is safe, and that's absolutely not the case. Or if all those factors are present, then the child will experience abuse. And again, that's not the idea of the toxic trio. The toxic trio is a kind of a broad spectrum of concerns which can impact families in different ways. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if those things are present, a child will be at harm, but it's just to be mindful that those are risk factors which may put a child in danger, and practitioners should be supported to evaluate the bigger picture and respond to the specific individual needs of children and families. And of course, there are lots of other kind of areas of concern which may impact a child to be at risk of harm, not just those three categories. Sorry, I always get a dry mouth when I'm teaching. So as practitioners, we all have a professional responsibility in safeguarding. So all staff who work in health and social care play an essential part of ensuring children, young people, adults at risk and their families receive the care, support and services that they need. You may be the first one to be aware that an individual or a family is experiencing difficulties. You may be that first practitioner that they feel able to open up to. You may be that first practitioner who notices an injury on a child or notices something just out of the ordinary. With safeguarding, I always feel that, I almost get like a gut instinct that something isn't quite right. And whether that be that a child is experiencing harm or whether a family needs more support, I almost get that kind of, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that as well, of kind of feeling that, there's something actually more here that needs exploring, or I might need further help and support with. All healthcare workers have a duty to share concerns if you feel a child or an adult is suffering or at risk of an abuse and neglect. And it's safeguarding is a statutory requirement in our roles and in our professional identities as well. Now, with safeguarding, it's really important to remember that you are not alone. If you have concerns about child abuse in your healthcare setting or in your workplace, always get further support and further help. And you can contact your local safeguarding team, your multi-agency safeguarding hubs, social care for further support. So again, these situations are complex, and you should absolutely not feel that you're alone making this decision. Please always get senior support. And even now, I've got quite an extensive background in safeguarding. I absolutely pick up the phone and speak to my colleagues, speak to senior nurses or senior people in safeguarding or social care to get further advice and support. And sometimes it's just that you need to talk it through with somebody to get that reassurance really of actually, let's act. Let's get some other agencies in. Let's notify somebody who's got a bit more experience in dealing with safeguarding. Just to kind of reassure yourself as a practitioner, you've done everything you can for a child or a family in your care. Now, professional curiosity is an important factor when it comes to working with children and families, particularly around safeguarding. So nurturing professional curiosity and challenge are essential parts of safeguarding, and it's a fundamental aspect of working together to keep children and young people safe. It's the skill to explore, understand what is happening, rather than making assumptions or accepting things at face value. So it's that asking those further questions, asking those uncomfortable questions, but also having that non-judgmental attitude and tone in the way that you work with a family, but getting those further answers to what's going on with a child or what's going on with a family can really help kind of build that picture of what's going on in that home. Now, in relation to safeguarding, safe uncertainty is an approach which focuses on safety but takes into account changing information, different perspectives, and acknowledges that certainty may not be achievable. And sometimes we can only get to that safe uncertainty. We've got safety in the forefront of our mind, but sometimes we don't always have the answers to all our questions, and we may not get the answers to all our questions. And as long as you can kind of safely assess that child, safely refer your concerns or talk it through with a senior body, sometimes those are the things that you just have to accept in your role, that you've done everything that you can. Now, we do have a responsibility when it comes to safeguarding to share information. So information sharing is effective for safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children and young people. It's a key factor identified in serious case reviews where poor information sharing has resulted in missed opportunities to take action that keeps children and young people safe. So in a lot of the serious case reviews, when they get all the kind of the multi-agencies and or the people around the child, so education, GP, ambulance service, health visitors or school nurses, they get them into the room and they piece the pieces together. Quite often what you find is that when there has been a serious case review, there has been some information withheld somewhere and it's not been shared with the other agencies, which possibly could have made a difference for that child. So that's why it is important that we are sharing information through the right channels. Now, you can seek advice from your governance leads in the places where you work if you're in any doubt about what information to be shared and with who, if you're unsure of anything. It's important as well that when you are working with families, that you are open and honest and you're transparent. So if you are working with a family and you feel that you need to put a safeguarding referral in, it's really important to try and be as honest as you can with that family. And again, there's ways that you can have that conversation, rather than, kind of being quite blunt and saying, I'm going to refer you to a social worker. Sometimes that can stop a family from engaging with you. And there's different ways that you can word it. The way that I generally word, if I'm going to refer someone to a family to social care, the way that I word it is I kind of say, I feel that you might need some additional support. I know you're concerned about X, Y, and Z. Therefore, are you happy for me to do the referral to children's safeguarding or, children's services, not children's safeguarding? I'm going to refer you to children's services and I need to inform you that's my action and that's what I'm going to do to get you the further support that you need. And it's shown as good practice that, if you can be open and honest with families, so they know where they're at, that is kind of good practice, really, and we should be doing that. And unfortunately, sometimes there are cases, it may be on reflection that you notice things and you think, actually, I need to step in here, I need to refer to social care. So there may be times where you've not been able to inform a family, but ideally, best practices to have that open and honest conversation with families if you are going to do some further information sharing or referral to social care. So I put this slide on here because I think this is a really good picture, and it really kind of identifies with me as all the different people who are involved with a child or with a family that hold a little piece to the puzzle. So if you've got, if I was the health visitor, for example, if I didn't work with the other agencies around me, I only hold a certain amount of knowledge. And by kind of sharing that information or involving other members of the MDT with open discussions, you can really piece together what's happening for a family, because you will only see one side, and it may be that education sees something else, it may be that the GP has seen something else, and by coming together you can really kind of fit those pieces of the puzzle together. Now, one good example of this, where a really brilliant example of multi-agency working when it comes to safeguarding, is something called a MARAC. So MARAC is a multi-agency meeting where information is shared on high-risk domestic abuse cases between representatives. So it's this kind of open table where you have lots of different multi-professionals in the room, and these can include helplines, women's aid, police, victim support, housing services. You might have education, NHS, independent domestic abuse advisors, and those are people who come on behalf of the victim, relate and probation. And that's not a complete list. There may be other professionals in the room as well, but just to give you examples for this night's webinar. So in Greater Manchester, for example, we have 12 multi-agency risk assessment conferences, one per police division, and it's similar throughout the UK. And if you are concerned that an individual or family you are working with is suffering from domestic abuse, then you can make a referral to MARAC. And at the heart of MARAC is the working assumption that no single agency or individual can see the complete picture of the life of a victim, but all may have insights that are crucial to their safety. And it's very much going back to the slide that I was talking about before. Everybody holds a little bit of that puzzle. They come together and piece together what's happening for the family, and they therefore will make their actions around who might be best suited to support a family in need. Now, following on from MARACs, which solely focus on domestic abuse, they have now developed something called a SARAC, which is a sexual abuse risk assessment conference, where they discuss cases of sexual abuse or rape. And again, I think this is a really good working example of how multi-agencies work together to come together for a need of a family or a child. Now, it's important in safeguarding to realise that we all have differences of opinion, and you will always get this kind of professional conflict. You probably have professional conflict in your day-to-day lives at work. I know in the NHS, I think that the evidence shows like 40% of teams experience this kind of this conflict in the workplace. It's around us everywhere, but particularly in safeguarding, you may come across professional differences. And differences of opinion, concerns and issues arise for practitioners at work, and it's important that they're resolved effectively and swiftly as possible. Having professional differences within safeguarding practice is a sign of a healthy and well-functioning partnership. So again, not something to be feared of. Absolutely, professional challenge is absolutely should be what we're expecting when we do work with other members of the MDT. You can see a little love heart going up there, and it may be that you've experienced that where you've got a little bit of conflict. And again, it's signs of a healthy functioning relationship, constructive challenge is something that we should be expecting, particularly around safeguarding, and it helps us as practitioners to grow as well. So, I absolutely expect to be challenged in a constructive way, and that helps me, keeps me on the toes, keeps me up to date, keeps me thinking, what questions did I not ask? What opportunities did I not, should I be thinking of for next time? So again, with safeguarding, we're working with lots of different agencies. It may be that social workers have a different kind of opinion to health workers, and again, expect to be challenged and expect to challenge others as well. And again, a way that you can resolve that challenge or resolve that conflict is by bringing more multi-agency professionals to the table. So if you have got a conflict of opinion, maybe asking one of our multi-agency colleagues to come in to have a different perspective of it, you know, having that kind of sit round the table, that open discussion, and very much keep that child and that family at heart to overcome those differences. Because it's absolutely essential that we don't kind of focus on the conflict, and we keep that child or that family in the heart of what we're doing. And again, professional differences can be reduced by clarity about roles and responsibilities. So if any of you are able in your professional employment, if you're able to spend time with other members of the MDT or other agencies to see exactly what they do and what their roles are, that can really help with child safeguarding. It can help when you're thinking about who you can refer to, what agencies can get involved, but also to understand everybody's role and responsibility as well. And by doing that, you can minimise conflict. But again, just see conflict as it's a healthy sign of safeguarding, and we should absolutely be expecting that in our roles. Now, just moving on, I just thought I would discuss this evening about the levels of need. So the levels of need are designed to support professionals when making decision about what level of support a family needs and what tools and other agencies are available to support this work. Whatever their level of need, children and young people should always have access to universal services. I'll show you the framework on the next slide. It will come a little bit clearer as I move to the next slide. And for most children, this will provide the opportunities they need to reach their potential. However, there are times when their need means they require an enhanced level of support due to their increased complexity of need or impact of external factors. So across the UK, children are usually categorised in this framework of levels of need. So all children in the UK come under the level 1, which is a universal need. So that means they have a universal offer. They're offered the immunisation programme. They have midwives and health visitors up to age 5, and then school nurses from 5 up until leaving school that do health checks and that type of thing. So universal need just means that most children in the UK come under level 1 and they get access to that level of service. Now, level 2 is classed as children with additional needs. So it may be that you've got a child that has a speech and language problem. They would come under level 2 because you've got another service involved in that child. So they're not universal, they've got another service involved in their care. Or it might be a child with a significant health problem that needs to go and see the paediatrician for on a regular basis. Those children would come under level 2. Level 3 is more complex needs, so children that have a lot of services involved. So, they might be under speech and language, they may be under paediatricians, they may be under dietitians, they may be under continence services. So children that have a lot of services involved generally come under level 3. Now, it can be things as well, like if a child is with a parent who's got a mental health problem, then those children would come under 2 or 3, depending on how many professionals are involved in the family. And again, children that come under these kind of amber brackets of level 2 and level 3 usually have something called an early help assessment in place. So that's like a shared care document, which I'll talk to you about on the next slide, which the professionals kind of work together to support that family or that child. And level 4 are children that are in the safeguarding arena, so have an allocated social worker. They may have health issues as well, but as soon as social services become involved, they're under a level 4, they're social worker led, and they usually have regular meetings, team around the child. It's called different things in different areas, where they will have a sit round the table meeting, and they will discuss the needs of the child and make sure that every multi-agency person knows what's going on for that family. They bring all the pieces of the puzzle together, and they work out the best course of action for that child. Usually children in level 3 can sometimes have a team around the child meeting as well, but definitely in level 4, those safeguarding children, those children at risk of abuse, we monitor them very, very closely within that framework, and also looked after children as well. So as soon as the child's removed from their parents, they're in care of the local authority, those children stay under level 4 as well. And we have regular meetings and reviews with whoever's involved in that child's case, whether it be education, health visitors, school nurses, GPs, paediatricians, whoever's involved in that child will sit round the table and discuss that child's case. So, as I mentioned earlier, children who are, let me just move this out the way, children that are level 2, 3 and 4 usually have something called an early help assessment. This used to be called a CAF, Common Assessment Framework, but they've changed it now to an early help assessment. So it's a shared assessment tool across agencies in the UK. It's a shared strengths-based tool that can be used by all practitioners to provide a coordinated response so that families receive the support that they need, so that it's this kind of one care plan, this shared care record between health and social care and education, with the needs of a child well documented on this framework, so everybody knows what's going on for the child. And an early help assessment is not for when there are concerns about a child or they have been harmed or may be at risk of harm. So it's very much about early intervention. So children with additional needs, whether there's needs in the home, whether it's housing, parental mental health, substance misuse or health needs, it can be any of those needs, then we would put an early help assessment in place. So early help is intervening early, trying to tackle problems as soon as they arise for children, young people and their families with a population most at risk of developing problems. It's an effective intervention. Intervention may occur at any point in a child or a young person's life. So it can be anywhere from birth up until age 16, 18, if it's a looked after child, you can use an early help assessment framework. So again, it is just worth knowing that if you're working with a family, there are complex needs. Have they got an early help assessment? Can you have access to that early help assessment going through the right channels? And it may be that you even initiate the early help assessment, again, as a way of gathering that information for the professionals around that child. Now, intended outcomes from an early help assessment are what they feel that it can help with are things like an increased number of children who are school ready. This is a real problem. Often we get, children who are 4 and 5, they start reception, and particularly if they're in households where families are struggling and they're not school ready, it may be that their speech is poor, they're not potty trained, they use a dummy, they have tantrums and outbursts, things like that. And that early help assessment really helps to identify that if a child it does have some additional needs or the family is in need of support, getting that early intervention in sooner, so those children are more school ready. And again, there are other kind of intended outcomes, so things like an increased 9-month and 2-month check. So when we're looking at development of children, we've seen that by implementing an early help assessment, that those children are brought more to appointments, they're more aware of services. It may be that we've got in there early and got them some extra help with housing. It may be that families are accessing local resources more as a result of an early help assessment framework on that shared document against the multi-agency team. Now, just moving on to looked after children. Now, most children stay with their parents after a child protection inquiry. So if there are some safeguarding concerns, so for example, neglect or emotional abuse, social services generally try and work with the family as much as they can before they have to remove the child. Now, there are some cases where absolutely, depending on the significance and the risk of the abuse, or if quite significant abuse has occurred, then they will remove those children. But for things low level, for example, low level neglect, they will try and get that early help assessment in, get the services in, and try and keep that child with their parents in cases with targeted support. Now, unfortunately, there are those children that do get removed from their parents, and a child who is classed as a looked after child or a LAC child is a child that's been in the local authority for 24 hours or more. A child stops being a looked after child when they're adopted, they return home or turn 18. So as I said on that level of need framework, these children are level 4, so they've got quite a targeted kind of MDT discussion around these children. But again, if those children leave foster care and get adopted out, then they come under universal services again, unless there is any additional needs or health problems with the child. Research shows that when looked after children are compared with children who've not been in care, they tend to have poorer outcomes in a number of areas, such as educational attainment, mental and physical health. So they do have poorer health outcomes, unfortunately, the looked after children. So because we know that looked after children have poorer health outcomes, we like to keep a close eye on these children. So they will have 6 monthly reviews with school nurses or health visitors, depending on how old they are. They will have paediatric assessments, and they will have regular kind of team meetings, team around the child with social care and health and education, to make sure that we're meeting the needs of those children, to try and improve those statistics, to try and improve the health and well-being of children who are in the local authority. So ways that we can improve the multi-agency response to child safeguarding, it's all about that good communication. So with most things, good communication is effective for multi-agency working. It's about building trusting relationships as well. So it's understanding roles, understanding how other professionals work, other frameworks, knowing people's responsibilities can help kind of build that multi-agency approach, and good communication is absolutely crucial to that. You need to be clear about what you're sharing and why. So if you do need to speak to another member of the MDT or an agency, you need to be really clear about what you're sharing. Are you letting people know just for information, or are you concerned, and making a child protection referral? So you need to be really clear with your language. Again, try and avoid using different terminology, because obviously in medical fields, we've got lots of acronyms. And again, when you're talking to a social worker, you might be talking to education, you may be talking to nursery. Again, they won't know the jargon that we're used to using as health professionals. So just be mindful of your language as well. And, trying to be as clear as you possibly can when you're working with the multi-agency. Acknowledge when information's been shared with you. So, if you do speak to another member of the MDT or an agency, it's about kind of building those relationships, making sure that they feel that their contribution is valued. So, for example, it might be when I was a health visitor, a nursery might ring and speak to me about a child or a family, and it's about kind of letting them know that I really value that they've spent that, taken that time to talk to me about a family, that their contribution is valued, because they're more likely to pick up the phone and speak to me again, for example. And again, as I've said, it is absolutely crucial about understanding MDT's roles. So, understanding what other people do. And, if you do have any professional development time, maybe part of your appraisals in work, you can, maybe suggest, would you be able to spoke out, branch out and spend some time with other services, particularly around children as well. If you have any concerns about the actions being taken to protect a child, you must raise these and follow your organisational procedures. So again, if you're concerned about something doesn't quite sit right with you about a way a situation is being managed, absolutely go further, speak to your safeguarding leads, speak to, social care, get that further advice support that you need. Just on some slides here, I've just put some additional information which has helped me build the PowerPoint this evening.